Story 1: The Haunting Roommate. Moving into a shared apartment was a leap of faith. After a year in the cramped dormitories, I was ready for more space. More freedom. The modest 3-bedroom unit wasn't luxurious, but it was affordable, close to campus, and promised the peace I craved. Talia, the other tenant, was a dream roommate, quiet, tidy, and perpetually buried in her chemistry textbooks. The third room had remained vacant for weeks, but the landlord assured us a new tenant would be moving in soon. When Aiko arrived, it was past 10 p.m. on a rainy Saturday night. Her knock on the door was so soft I almost missed it. She stood there, petite and slightly hunched, her dark hair dripping wet and her suitcase trailing behind her. "Hi," she said, her English halting but clear. "I'm Aiko, your new roommate." I welcomed her in, showing her around the apartment as she offered small smiles and polite nods. Her voice was quiet, her movements deliberate, almost too precise. I chalked it up to nerves. She seems sweet, I thought as I went to bed that night. If only I had known how wrong I was. For the first week, everything seemed normal. Aiko spent most of her time in her room, emerging occasionally to cook or ask me questions about the bus routes. She was reserved, almost shy, but always polite. She smiled faintly when I taught her how to navigate the subway or showed her where to find the best coffee near campus. Her gratitude felt genuine, and I started to think we'd get along just fine. But as the days turned into weeks, small things began to unsettle me. I'd catch her standing in the hallway, staring at my bedroom door. When I looked up from the couch, I'd find her watching me from the kitchen, her gaze steady and unblinking. At first, I brushed it off. She's just adjusting, I told myself. She's in a new country, surrounded by strangers. It must be overwhelming. But as her behavior grew more peculiar, my rationalizations began to falter. The first truly strange incident happened late one night. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I glanced toward the window. The balcony connected all 3 bedrooms, a small shared space overlooking the quiet street below. I'd left my blinds half open, letting the glow of the streetlights filter in. That's when I saw her. Aiko stood on the balcony, her silhouette stark against the dim light. She was facing my window, her head tilted slightly, as if she were studying me. At first, I thought she hadn't noticed I was looking. But then her lips twitched, curling into a faint smile. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled the blinds shut, my hands shaking slightly. The next morning, I asked Talia if she'd noticed anything unusual about Aiko. "She's quiet," Talia said, barely looking up from her textbook. "Keeps to herself." "Why?" "No reason," I lied. But the unease lingered. The balcony stairs became a nightly occurrence. No matter what time I went to bed, Aiko seemed to be there, standing motionless, her gaze fixed on my window. I started keeping the blinds closed, but it didn't help. I could feel her presence, the weight of her eyes pressing through the thin fabric. Then, she started showing up in other places. I'd walk to the bus stop in the morning, and moments later, she'd appear, standing just a few feet away. She never said anything, never acknowledged me. But her timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Once, I stopped at a cafe near campus to grab a coffee. As I waited in line, I felt a familiar prickle of unease. I turned. And there she was, sitting at a table in the corner, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When our eyes met, she smiled faintly, as if she'd been expecting me. The night everything escalated began like any other. I locked my bedroom door, a habit I'd developed over the past few weeks, and climbed into bed, hoping for an uninterrupted night's sleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a faint noise. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. But as I lay there, straining to listen, the sound became clearer, the soft creak of floorboards, followed by the faintest scrape of metal against wood. Someone was at my door. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. The doorknob jiggled once, then again, harder this time. "Aiko?" I called out, my voice trembling. The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a soft knock. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the cold floor, pressing my ear against the wood. I listened, every muscle in my body tensed. And then I heard her voice, low and almost melodic. "I just want to talk," she whispered. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My phone was on the nightstand, and I grabbed it, my fingers fumbling to unlock the screen. The doorknob rattled again, this time with more force. The sound of her nails scraping against the wood made my skin crawl. "Aiko! Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The rattling ceased, and for a moment, I thought she might have gone. But then I heard it, the soft pad of her footsteps retreating down the hall. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I confronted her in the kitchen. "Why were you at my door last night?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. She looked up from her cup of tea, her expression blank. "I wasn't," she said simply. "Yes. You were. I heard you." She tilted her head, her dark eyes studying me intently. "You must have been dreaming," she said, her tone calm but unsettling. I knew then that I couldn't stay. Over the next 2 days, I packed my belongings, avoiding Aiko as much as possible. She didn't try to speak to me again, but her presence lingered, a shadow that seemed to follow me wherever I went. On the morning I moved out, she appeared in the hallway as I carried my last box to the car. "Leaving?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. "Yeah," I said, not meeting her eyes. "Why?" I hesitated, my grip tightening on the box. "I just found a better place," I said finally. She didn't respond, just stood there, watching me as I walked out the door. I never saw her again. 4 weeks. I couldn't shake the memory of her face, the way her eyes seemed to follow me even when she wasn't there. Every shadow, every faint sound made my heart race. I told myself I had imagined it, that she was just an odd, socially awkward girl who didn't know how to connect with others. But deep down, I knew better. What did she want? Why did she act the way she did? I'll never know. Have you ever had a roommate who made you question your safety? What would you have done in my place? Story 2, The Night Stalker. They say your home is your sanctuary, the one place where you're supposed to feel safe. But what happens when the walls meant to protect you become your prison, trapping you with something, or someone, who means you harm? That night started like any other. I was curled up on the couch, a steaming mug of tea in my hands, and an old horror movie playing softly on the TV. The rain outside tapped against the windows, creating a soothing rhythm that made me feel cocooned in my little house at the edge of town. But then I heard it. Tap. 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 At first, I thought it was the rain. The kind of noise you brush off without a second thought. But the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. I muted the TV, straining to listen. Tap. 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 The sound was coming from the living room window. My chest tightened as I slowly turned my head toward the glass. What would you do if someone was standing outside your window in the dead of night, watching you? The moment I saw the shadow, my breath caught in my throat. The figure outside the window was tall and still, shrouded in darkness except for the faint outline illuminated by the porch light. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. I froze, clutching my mug as if it could somehow shield me. My house was a cozy little place on the outskirts of a sleepy town, surrounded by thick woods. It was perfect for peace and quiet. But now, that isolation felt suffocating. "Can I help you?" I tried again, louder this time. Nothing. The figure finally shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something pale, his face. The porch light flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. I couldn't make out any details, just the unsettling certainty that someone was there. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice did little to ease my panic. "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on their way." "Is the door locked?" "Yes," I whispered, my eyes darting between the window and the front door. "Good. Stay where you are." The minutes stretched on endlessly. The figure remained outside, unmoving, a silent sentinel in the rain. I thought about turning off the lights, but something about the idea of sitting in total darkness made my skin crawl. Then, just as the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, the figure stepped back. Slowly, deliberately, he melted into the shadows of the yard, disappearing into the woods. By the time the police arrived, there was no sign of him. They searched the property, their flashlights slicing through the dark, but found nothing. "Probably just a prank," one of the officers said. But the look in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced. The rest of the evening was a blur. The officers assured me they'd patrol the area and advised me to call again if anything seemed off. I nodded numbly, locking the door behind them as they left. Despite their reassurances, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind sent me bolt upright, my ears straining for any hint of danger. By the time the sun rose, I felt like a ghost of myself. But the daylight brought a fragile sense of safety. I convinced myself it was over, just a random stranger passing through. But as night fell again, the unease returned. This time, the knocking started at the front door. It was soft at first, almost polite, but it quickly escalated. Thud. 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 I crept to the door, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear over it. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No response. Then, just as I was about to step away, the knocking stopped, and a low, muffled laugh came from the other side of the door. Terrified, I called the police again. This time, the officers arrived quickly. Their presence a small comfort in the suffocating darkness. They searched the yard and the surrounding woods but found no sign of the intruder. "He must have run off," one officer said, his tone attempting reassurance. "If he comes back, call us immediately." I nodded, though my hands wouldn't stop shaking. After they left, I double-checked every lock in the house, even propping a chair under the doorknob for extra security. Hours passed without incident, and I started to believe the worst was over. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard it again, this time from the basement. A faint creak echoed through the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of the basement door slowly opening. My breath caught as I sat up, straining to listen. The door was old, its hinges prone to groaning loudly. But I hadn't opened it in days, and I was certain I'd locked it. Swinging my legs off the bed, I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my nightstand and tiptoed into the hallway. The basement door was ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling into the hall. My hand trembled as I reached for the light switch, flipping it on. The stairs leading down were empty, the dim bulb casting eerie shadows on the concrete walls below. But just as I was about to close the door, a voice drifted up from the darkness. "You're finally home." I slammed the door shut, shoving the bolt into place with shaking hands. My heart raced as I backed away, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. Before I could react, the doorknob rattled violently, as though someone was trying to force it open. "Who are you?" I screamed, clutching the bat tightly. No response. Just the relentless sound of the doorknob turning. Panicking, I ran back to my bedroom and locked the door. My hands fumbled with my phone as I dialed 911 for the third time that night. "He's inside the house," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please, hurry." The dispatcher's calm instructions barely registered as I pressed my back against the door, listening to the chaos outside. Footsteps echoed through the house, heavy and deliberate, moving closer to my room. Then came the knocking. The sound was slow, methodical, each knock sending a jolt of fear through my body. "Let me in," the voice said, low and rasping. Tears streamed down my face as I gripped the bat, every muscle in my body screaming for escape. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The door rattled violently, the wood splintering under the force. I screamed, backing into the corner of the room, bracing myself for the worst. Just as the door began to give way, red and blue lights flashed outside the window. The sound of sirens filled the air, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps on the porch. The intruder's movements stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. When the police burst into the house moments later, the intruder was gone. The officers searched the property thoroughly, but there was no sign of the man. No footprints, no evidence of forced entry, nothing to prove he'd ever been there. "Are you sure you saw someone?" one officer asked gently. "Yes," I insisted, my voice shaky. "He was here. He tried to get into my room." They didn't doubt me outright, but their skeptical glances said enough. To them, it was just another late-night scare, a figment of an overactive imagination. But I knew the truth. I stayed with my sister for the next few weeks, too afraid to return home, even in the safety of her house. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the events over and over. When I finally returned to my own home, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the trees outside filled me with dread. I never saw the intruder again, but his presence lingered. An invisible weight that turned my sanctuary into a place of unease. They never found him. To this day, I don't know who he was or why he chose my house. Was it random? Or had he been watching me for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment? The thought keeps me up at night, my mind spinning with questions that will never be answered. Have you ever had an experience that made you question how safe you really are, even in your own home? Story 3: The Rest Stop Chase. The long stretches of highway were endless, dark ribbons cutting through the barren desert. My dad and I had been driving for hours, the hum of the car engine a monotonous backdrop to our journey. We were heading west, crossing state lines to visit my grandmother, who lived in a remote little town miles from any major city. The plan was simple: drive until we couldn't anymore, stop for a break, and then keep going. It wasn't the first road trip we'd taken together, and it felt like just another leg of the journey. As the clock crept past midnight, fatigue began to weigh on us. "We'll pull over at the next rest stop," Dad said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. When we finally saw the small blue sign marking the rest area, it was like a beacon of relief. We pulled into the lot, which was sparsely dotted with a few other cars. A single flickering streetlight illuminated part of the cracked pavement, casting eerie shadows. It seemed peaceful enough. "I'll stretch my legs. Then we'll rest here for a bit," Dad said, stepping out into the cool night air. I followed, pulling my hoodie tighter against the biting wind. But then, just as we began to relax, the truck appeared. It was parked at the far end of the lot, shrouded in darkness. We hadn't noticed it when we pulled in, but its engine roared to life as we exited the car. I glanced toward it, instinctively uneasy. The truck's headlights clicked on, cutting through the night like two blinding eyes. At first, I thought it was just another traveler. Maybe the driver had been resting like us, getting ready to hit the road again. But something about the way the truck moved made my stomach churn. It didn't drive toward the highway. Instead, it crept forward, its tires crunching slowly over the gravel, heading directly toward us. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I see it," he replied, his eyes narrowing. The truck stopped a few spaces away, its engine idling. The windows were tinted, concealing the driver, but I could feel the weight of their gaze. "Let's get back in the car," Dad said, his tone firm but calm. Back inside the safety of our vehicle, we locked the doors and sat in tense silence. The truck remained where it was, its headlights beaming directly at us. "Probably nothing," Dad muttered, more to himself than to me. "Could just be a coincidence." But neither of us believed that. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The truck didn't move, didn't turn off its lights, didn't do anything except sit there like a predator watching its prey. Finally, Dad shifted the car into gear. "Let's get out of here," he said. As we pulled toward the exit, the truck suddenly lurched forward. It swung out of its space and followed us, its engine roaring like an animal in pursuit. "Why is he following us?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Dad didn't answer, his focus locked on the road ahead. The truck's headlights loomed in the rearview mirror, growing closer with every second. We merged onto the highway, hoping the truck would veer off or pass us. But it didn't. Instead, it sped up, tailing us so closely I could almost feel its presence pressing against the back of our car. "Is he trying to run us off the road?" I asked, gripping the edge of my seat. "Not if I can help it," Dad said, his voice tense but steady. He pressed down on the gas, and the car surged forward, the engine straining against the sudden demand for speed. The truck matched our pace, its high beams flooding the interior of our car with harsh, white light. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, its lanes empty except for us and the truck. The darkness of the surrounding desert felt oppressive, a void that offered no refuge. "Hold on," Dad warned as he took a sharp exit onto a narrow side road. The tires screeched as we rounded the curve, the truck close behind. The road was rough, unpaved in places, and every bump sent jolts through the car. "Can't we call the police?" I asked, fumbling for my phone. "No signal out here," Dad said. "We'll have to lose him ourselves." He veered onto another road, this one even narrower and lined with jagged rocks. The truck followed, its engine roaring louder as it closed the gap between us. I could see the silhouette of the driver now, a dark figure behind the wheel. He wasn't trying to hide anymore, his intent was clear. "Turn off the lights," Dad said suddenly. "What?" "Do it. Trust me." I reached over and flicked off the headlights. The world plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the moon and stars above. Dad slowed the car, pulling off to the side of the road and cutting the engine. We sat in silence, holding our breath as the truck barreled past us, its headlights slicing through the night. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then the truck's brake lights flared, and it screeched to a stop. "He's turning around," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Not if we're gone first," Dad said. He restarted the car, keeping the lights off as he drove down the road, navigating by moonlight. The truck's headlights reappeared in the distance, sweeping back and forth as the driver searched for us. We took turn after turn, weaving through the labyrinth of dirt roads. Each time we thought we'd lost him, the truck's lights would reappear, relentless and unyielding. Finally, the road opened up onto a small clearing. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of a town, civilization. "There," I said, pointing. Dad floored the gas, the car jolting forward as we sped toward the lights. The truck was close behind, its engine roaring like a beast closing in for the kill. As we neared the edge of town, the truck began to fall back. Its headlights dimmed, and it finally turned off, disappearing into the darkness. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of a brightly lit Walmart parking lot. We sat in the car, the fluorescent lights above casting a cold glow over everything. My hands were still trembling, my heart racing as I tried to process what had just happened. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I don't know," Dad said, his own hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But we're not stopping at any more rest stops tonight." We stayed there for an hour, too afraid to leave, even surrounded by other cars and the bustle of late-night shoppers. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truck was still out there, waiting for us. To this day, I don't know who was driving that truck or why they targeted us. Maybe it was just a cruel prank. Or maybe their intentions were far darker. What I do know is that the memory of that night has never left me. Every time I see a truck on a dark road, I feel that same spike of fear. The same rush of adrenaline that carried us through those harrowing moments. What would you have done in our place? Could you have stayed calm? Or would the fear have consumed you? As I closed the chapter of my life in that eerie apartment, I couldn't help but feel that my departure wasn't an ending but a beginning for someone else. What truly haunted me wasn't just Aiko's presence but the lingering question, who was she really? And why did she fixate on me? Every creak of the floorboard, every shadow in the night, felt like echoes of her intent. Was she merely a lonely soul in need of connection? Or was there something far more sinister lurking beneath her polite smiles and unsettling stares? Perhaps. The mystery of Aiko isn't just about her, it's about how our fears take root and bloom in the soil of the unknown. What do you think she wanted? Have you ever encountered someone whose presence made you question your reality? I'd love to hear your theories and personal stories in the comments below. Let's unravel these haunting mysteries together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wolf Tales for more bone-chilling tales that will keep you up at night. Until next time, sleep tight, if you can.